You ever look at a company and just wonder, how do they do that? How do they always seem to be one step ahead? Well, today we're going to crack open one of the all-time great books on this stuff, Kenichi Ohmae's The Mind of the Strategist. So let's get right into this incredible explainer on what it really takes to win.
Right off the bat, Ohmae hits us with a pretty bold claim. He says a lot of big companies have just forgotten how to think. They've gotten so bogged down in endless planning meetings, reports, and processes that the actual spark of strategic thinking has just fizzled out. They're acting more like rigid bureaucracies than nimble, creative businesses.
Okay, so if it's not about having these huge, complicated plans and giant teams of analysts, then what is it? What's the secret sauce? Well, Ohmae suggests it's something completely different. It's less about the paperwork and way more about a state of mind. And that brings us to what Ohmae sees as the central conflict. This tug of war that's happening inside so many organizations. On one side, you have that rigid, by-the-book corporate planning, and on the other, you've got dynamic, fluid, real strategic thinking.
And this, right here, is the very definition of analysis paralysis. You know, the corporate planning side is all about control, making things predictable, boxing everything in. But real strategic thinking, that's messy. It's flexible, it's creative, and it's driven by these sudden aha moments. It's really the difference between following a recipe perfectly and being the chef who invents a brilliant new dish from scratch.
So this is the key insight, really. Ohmae is telling us that world-class strategy doesn't pop out of a computer model or a formula. Not at all. It comes from developing a very specific kind of mind, one that's open, creative, and just endlessly curious.
So how do you even build that kind of mind? Well, Ohmae gives us this one simple but incredibly powerful tool. You just have to constantly ask why. And not just once. You got to be relentless. He says you should ask why 5 times in a row to really dig past the obvious symptoms of a problem and get down to what's really going on. It's all about finding that root cause.
And when you do all that digging, this is where you end up. Now, a strategist's mind isn't against analysis. Let's be clear. It just knows its place. Analysis is a tool. It's not the master. Think of it this way. Analysis is the GPS. It's the steering wheel, but it's not the engine. The real horsepower, those game-changing ideas, they come from intuition, from creativity, from that drive to win.
Okay, so that's the mindset. But how do you put it into practice? How do you turn this way of thinking into a concrete plan? Ohmae gives us a beautifully simple but really powerful tool to map out any competitive landscape. He calls it the strategic triangle.
It all boils down to these 3 C's. First, the corporation. That's you. What are you actually good at? Where are you weak? Then, the customer. What do they really truly want and need? And finally, the competition. What are they up to? What are their advantages? For Ohmae, strategy is the art of creating a winning position in the interplay between these 3. It's about finding that sweet spot where what you do best meets a customer's need in a way your competition just can't touch. Right. So you've used the 3 C's to map the playing field. You see all the pieces on the board. So what's your move? Ohmae lays out 4 fundamental plays, kind of like the core of a strategist's playbook for getting ahead.
First, you can focus on the key factors for success. Identify the 1 or 2 things that really decide who wins in your industry and dominate them. Second, you can build on relative superiority. If you're just flat out better at something than your competitors, you lean into it hard. Third, you can get aggressive, launching initiatives that completely change the rules of the game. And fourth, and this one's my favorite, you can exploit strategic degrees of freedom, making those clever, creative moves that your competitors literally can't or just don't see.
So this all sounds great in theory, right? But what does it look like out in the real world? Let's take a look at a couple of classic examples that show how powerful this thinking can be.
Take a look at Toyota. This is a perfect example of pursuing an aggressive initiative. They just kept asking why. They challenged the old common sense idea that you needed these huge, expensive warehouses full of parts. And the result? They invented the legendary just-in-time Kanban system, which didn't just help Toyota. It fundamentally rewired the economics of manufacturing for everyone.
Or how about Casio? They absolutely perfected the art of building on relative superiority. See, back in the day, their competitors were on these long, slow, 1 or 2 year product cycles. So what did Casio do? They just hit the gas. They started cranking out new models every few months. It was a brilliant move that made their rivals' entire way of doing business totally obsolete. They won by being faster and more flexible than anyone else.
So, what's the big takeaway here for us? The beauty of Ohmae's work is that it's not just for CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. It's a way of thinking. It's a lens you can apply to almost anything.
Ohmae uses this killer metaphor to warn against being busy just for the sake of being busy. Think about it. You can work your tail off. You can optimize every little detail. You can make everything look perfect. But if your basic strategy's flawed, if the ship is sinking, none of that effort matters. The most important thing is making sure you're on the right ship, pointed in the right direction first.
And that really brings us to the final question, the one I want to leave you with. What's the unchallenged assumption in your industry, in your company, in your own career? What's that piece of common sense that everyone just accepts, and it's just waiting for a strategist's mind to come along and ask, why? Because asking that question could be the very thing that unlocks a completely new future.